you have your address?
Your name, let's have it,
Okay,
give his name.
Leo Sanchez, 818 Sally Lane, Casper, Wyoming. It's only my second house. I've lived in it since my 29th birthday. I was born in the house. I was over on Walnut Street and moved out officially my 29th birthday.
Leo, why don't we just begin by you just telling us, about your life here in Casper and.
Okay. Uh, my grandfather, Gallegos, came up here to work on the Pathfinder Dam. And my father came here after World War I to work in the refinery. And he met my mother and they got married. Didn't know until after they got married that they were actually cousins, because both families had lived in Espanola, New Mexico for over 300 years. And then they moved to Colorado when they lost the land grant. And my father was born in Walsenburg, my mother in Alamosa, which is right next to each other practically. And then they migrated up here. My father's working at the refinery making buku bucks, a lot of money.
What year did they come here?
My father 1919 and my grandfather 1904. And so he moves up here and making tremendous money. Depression hit. Depression never touched Casper. And so Dad is buying up houses and property and everything like this. And he moved out of North Casper. And literally the first minority to move out of North Casper. And he moved over on Walnut Street. Now, anybody with a Mexican name or anybody of black coloring could not live in out of North Casper, because the people just wouldn't sell it to you. But my dad got pretty well known around the city of Casper. He was active in several organizations like the Eagles and the Moose and also in the Catholic Church and so on. And so he was respectable, okay, and so he was pretty much acknowledged around the city of Casper. And about the time just before he moved over on Walnut Street, my mother got sick with cancer in 1930. And then I was born and in 35, and then she died in 38 of the same cancer. But people didn't have insurance. So Dad had to sell everything he ever had, literally. Went deeply in debt because my mother had this, what is called familial multiple polyposis of the colon, which has killed probably about 30 members of my family. And I have had it, and my brother's died of it, sister died of it, my older sister has got an ostomy like I have, and my two sons have been operated on subtotal colectomies case. And I've had cousins and aunts and uncles and grandma and people die of this. So we've been written up in a lot of medical journals. But the thing is that what happened was Dad lost everything. And he refused to declare debt bankruptcy. And he's still making good money. World War II comes along. He opens up a foundry just out here on Yellowstone. And I think, quote and unquote, the only white man working there was a fellow from the school district who was a shop teacher. And he and my father ran this foundry, and my father hired a couple Mexican-American types and a black fellow, and they worked out there after their normal job. And what they were doing is making valves for the Navy. In fact, in that book there that I gave you, you see my father's picture under his name, and he's got one of the E flags, and he's so proud of that fact that he got this E for efficiency, I think it was, for any industry that exceeded their quota. And so Dad was pretty well known around Casper, but I'll tell you truthfully, we were practically the only minority outside North Casper until the 1950s. And in the 1950s, and several different types of families started moving out. There were Asian and black and Mexican types that were moving out and moving different parts of Casper, but they were pretty sparse. You got to remember, there are only two northern states that had laws against racial marriage, interracial marriage: Wyoming and Indiana. And of course, the 11 states of the South all had laws against interracial marriage. And in 1966, maybe 65, it was 65, the Wyoming legislature rescinded that law. I don't think Indiana rescinded theirs until into the 70s or almost into the 80s.
Did you say 66 or 65?
65, I think. I think Mr. Wold was the one that introduced that. But I always thought it was kind of strange that we had such laws. I grew up in Casper, and I went to St. Anthony School. My entire family went to St. Anthony School. And you're talking about racial situations. I remember we did have a black kid going to our school, and but it was only for a short time because his family couldn't find the kind of work they wanted, and so I think they went back to Chicago or something like that. Had one Jewish fellow, never forget him. And as far as race is concerned, boy, I just don't know that there were any problems that I ever saw. I can honestly tell you that, if anything, my name has helped me more than anything.
When your father lived in North Casper, did he ever share any anecdotes or any history of North Casper and the Afro-American community there?
Well, there used to be a roller skating rink over there, right on K Street, just 2 blocks east of the North Casper School. And they'd have dances there. And he would say that when they got into fights, it was always his family, the black people, against all the others. Mm-hmm. Because they were all neighbors and such, and some of the other guys would come downtown and or come over to North Casper because they had great dances and so on, and they always seemed to end up in a fight, and they'd be punching everybody and stuff like that. I think it's embellished, but he would tell stories. He tells one time about the fact that I think it was Stinky Davis's father. If you know who Stinky Davis is, it's all part of the Davis family. And he was a very popular kid, and Stinky Davis's father and my dad and my uncles were all in this big fight, and somebody hit Stinky Davis's father, and my dad hit him, and then somebody hauled off and hit my dad, and my mother picked up a chair and blasted over this guy's head. He says, "Don't you hit my husband like this," and stuff like that. And Mrs. Davis was over there just laughing like mad because a woman just didn't get into the fight. But the Davis family and my family are pretty friendly. But
would this be Robert and Helen Davis's father you're talking about, or
it might be.
Okay.
Robert, how old is he?
Robert's probably...
He's in his 70s.
70s, yes.
That's probably the one they called Stinky Davis.
Okay.
Because he'd run around with my sister and my brother and so on. But when we moved out of North Casper, I really didn't know any black kids except the ones that I worked with in selling newspapers. And that was a good time because you could make a lot of money. Casper's wide open. You had gambling, you had booze, you had prostitution, you had everything.
You're talking about 50s now?
Oh, I'm talking about the 40s.
40s, okay.
I could walk in the old Grand Central bar, and I'm in 5th grade, and I could put a 50-cent piece up on the bar and say, "Give me a slow gin fizz," and the guy would say, "Are you 21? I say, "Yes, sir." Mm-hmm. And he'd hand me my slow gin fizz. I love slow gin fizzes. And
where was the Grand Central bar?
It's right on the corner, catty corner from the Rialto Cigar Store. And it was an old-time bar. There are a string of bars. There are a lot of bars there. There are probably about 50 bars in the city of Casper. And right down 2nd Street from Center, I can think of probably 6 of them, just in that one area. And Casper was just a place where people came. But you got to remember, they came in on the weekends. The kids didn't stay at home if they lived outside. They rode buses into Casper. And if you went to the high school, you rode buses into Casper and you boarded at somebody's house. They had one-room schoolhouses all over the county where a teacher could live, and they may have anywhere from 1 to 10 students. But they never came into town at all because transportation wasn't available. So the families would bring their kids into town on a Sunday night when they went to church, and then they would take them home. They'd come in and pick them up on a Friday because they come in on Friday, pick up their groceries, and take their kids home. And then they'd bring them back on Sunday again.
Talking about like ranching families?
Ranching families, yeah. And so people would board Well, when the people came into town on the weekends, it was wild. I mean, it was just wide open, 24 hours a day. And we used to sell newspapers, and the Star Tribune is down at the old Tribune building right across from the Atrium Plaza. And we'd go into the back alley, and the printing presses would be cooking up, and it'd be very hot in there. And you'd go in and you buy your papers at 2.5 cents a paper. And so if you wanted 20 papers, and you took in 50 cents, and you bought your 20 papers, and then you went out and you sold them for a nickel. And so you doubled your money. But the fun was in the tips that you would get. So the big time to sell newspapers, and it was mostly black and Mexican types that would do this. Big time to sell your newspapers was Saturday night. So you'd be down there at midnight, and you'd get your newspapers. They'd come out about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and you'd head the Sunday morning edition, because it was a morning paper at that time on Sunday, but otherwise it was an afternoon paper. So you pick up your Sunday morning edition, and everybody'd start running, because you couldn't, there were no buses to speak of going down into the sandbar. Everybody'd run for the sandbar. And you wanted to be the first one into the whorehouses, because you could stand at that whorehouse door and sell newspapers to the customers and sell them to the whores. And when I say that, everybody goes, wow, but it wasn't the same thing. I hate to tell you this, but whores were basically respectable. In fact, I'll tell you, one of the big times that I really enjoyed, and my mother-in-law got very upset with me. She's from down south, and did you ever see the movie Driving Miss Daisy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's my mother-in-law. That is my mother-in-law. That old lady in Driving Miss Daisy is my mother-in-law. So I take her baby up to a restaurant in 1960 at the top of the hotel that's on First and Center there, and I look over and I see Leo Weiss and Fifi Blondine, who is the biggest pimp and the biggest madam in the whole Rocky Mountain region. And I went over and I said, Mr. Weiss, I'd like to introduce you to my fiancée. And I introduced him to Fifi Blondine, and my wife is shaking hands with him and so on. When she wrote home and told her mother that I introduced her to a pimp and a madam, I didn't think my mother-in-law was going to let her marry me, because you just didn't do things like that. And I said, it's a whole different culture. They were respected people. In fact, I just saw here a few months ago, Leo Weiss died out in Seattle. And they were historical characters, and they were generous people, really very generous.
Were they Caucasian or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But Fifi had a stable of black girls, and there was no segregation as such. And what's really funny is when you went into the houses of prostitution, into the cribs, to sell a newspaper, you'd look in there, and every one of them, I don't care, every one of them had a statue of the Virgin Mary and votive candles. It's hysterical. And you'd sell newspapers there at all the various houses. And boy, I'm trying to put all this together because it's not organized at all. But I'm saying you'd sell newspapers at those various houses, and you just got to know everybody. And everything straight on down from Center Street and to David Street, everything west was nothing but houses of prostitution and gambling. The old Alamo Hotel and that one building that's still on the corner of Ash and the Long Building, on the corner, catty corner from the Casper Bar and Lounge right now, or the Sandbar Lounge. That was about 10 rooms, and each one had its own little girl in there with a bed and so on, and sheep herders and cattlemen just go in and out. It was hysterical. And of course, when we'd sell newspapers, we'd go up to the restaurants and sell them, and the restaurants were going all night long, until 5 or 6 in the morning. Go into the Grand Central Bar, and you'd go up. I mean, we could walk in the Grand Central Bar and walk in and sell newspapers, and it's kind of like living in the old east side of New York and in the Wild West at the same time, because these people were real cowboys. I mean, some of those guys in that Grand Central Bar had not only come out west to settle Wyoming, they'd also fought in the Civil War. You know, there were Civil War veterans alive when I was selling newspapers, and things like this, and it's kind of hard to contemplate, but when I say I talk to Civil War veterans, and my students go, wow, you know, look like they died. But you got to remember the Civil War, the centennial was only in 1965 or 1960. So there were quite a few Civil War veterans, a lot of Spanish-American War veterans around. So we would sell newspapers, and we'd go up there, and there was a way you could hustle money. If they'd had a little too much to drink, you stick a newspaper in their face, and then you just scrape the change off the table. And we would enhance our revenue that way. And we would catch some wise guy coming out of a whorehouse, and we'd say, how are you, Mr. Brown? Well, hi, Leo. How are you doing? How many papers you got there? No, about 5, Mr. Brown. Well, will $3 cover it? And you could sell him in papers, you know, for $3. You'd make a good profit on it because he didn't want you to tell anybody he was coming out of the house of prostitution. Gambling, you could walk in and you'd stand there and you'd kind of put on it. We put on an act. We'd dress like we were poor, and we were poor, but we dressed really poor. And then we'd get kind of a face going like this, and people would feel sorry for you, and they'd give you big tips, and they'd say, are you hungry, boy? Yes, sir. Said, well, sit down and get you something to eat. Well, sir, I can get the meal for about half the price over there at the Demas Cafe, because they give us a good deal. Well, how much is a meal over there? 50 cents, sir. And they give you $1. You could walk into these restaurants and get free food. And then it's just more money you stick in your pocket. I remember one old black boy, I can't remember his name. He worked at the band rooms, which is right there at the Hall of Justice. Okay, right across the road. The van rooms occupies that corner spot just below Subway and that law office. The van rooms was just a long row of cribs, and you had to go up the stairs, and then you would go down the hallway, and there'd be doors on each side and so on. And
Could you tell Josh what you're talking about with cribs? We've had other people talk about
cribs are rooms where you just had nothing but a wash basin, and you had a bed, and oftentimes a shrine, and that's where the ladies did their business. So it was just like a private bedroom, except it was smaller than a bedroom. And that's why they called them cribs. There wasn't room for a dress or anything like that. This was just a place of business. And so they called them cribs because they were just very close in. So that you'd have maybe 20 cribs on one floor. So you'd have 20 whores in there doing their business, and guys would just line up. It's unbelievable. And don't ask me why, but
You're talking. I'm sorry to interrupt. You're talking about one black man. And
oh yeah, well there are two that that I always think of when I think of black people in early Casper, and they both had a rather interesting experience with me on the same night. I ran around with 2 kids, one named Buddy Cavino and another fellow by the name of Jimmy Gomez. We all went to St. Anthony's together, and we all sold newspapers together, ran around. Jimmy lived over in North Casper, and Buddy lived down at the end of First Street, right up against railroad tracks. And so we ran around together, and they kind of called us the Mexican Mafia, I guess is what it is. And
was Jimmy what was his last name?
Gomez.
Okay.
Had a beautiful sister. Oh, I'd like to see Marlene today. She was great. And so anyway, we ran around together, and we sell newspapers and everything. And we were coming home from school. We always had certain rituals that we'd do, like in the morning we'd run down to the bakery, which is located right near with the on Durban Street, right near the library. There was a bakery there, and we'd get a loaf of bread, and we'd put 10 cents together and get a loaf of bread, and we'd just tear it out and eat it with our hands. It'd come out of the oven hot, and that was just a great breakfast, because truthfully we didn't get bread very often at home. We had what they call depression bread, if you know what that is. It's kind of like an unleavened bread almost, kind of like a tortilla. And then what you'd do is you'd use depression butter, which is basically bacon grease and garlic salt. And that's how you put on your bread, and then you'd eat that with whatever you were eating. and we didn't have eggs much, and we didn't get a lot of fresh bread in the early 40s. So we'd pull our money and we'd get a loaf of bread and we'd tear it off and just eat it. And then we'd go over to the Bluebird Grocery, is where the cheese barrel is now located. And we would have a nickel each, and we'd buy one of those chocolate tops from Walter's Bakery. Oh, the greatest things in the world. Walter's Bakery is located right across the street from the Casper Sandbar Lounge, and it's that vacant lot now. That's where Walter's Bakery was, and everybody loved those chocolate tops. Walter Bakery made its money on the whorehouses, because what they would do is they just deliver tons of rolls and everything to each of the whorehouses for the ladies and for the guys sitting around, stuff like that. And they made a lot of money on those houses of prostitution. Well, they're right in the middle of the sandbar. But anyway, the van rooms there, we were going down to Buddy's house one time, and Jimmy says, hey, he had some firecrackers. And it was late at night. I think we'd been sneaking into the movies. I'll tell you, we used to sneak in the movies. And he had some firecrackers, a little string of ladyfingers. So Jimmy says, watch this. And he goes up the van rooms on the second floor, lights these things, and throws them down the doggone hallway, and we take off running. And they're going boom, 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 and people running out of the van rooms like you couldn't believe. We thought that was funny. Next Saturday night, decided to do it again. Well, it's old Buddy Covino's turn. So old Buddy takes a string of ladyfingers and he throws them down that hallway, and we run down the street and watch them come running out, and we just think it's funnier than all get out. Well, third Saturday night, old dumb Sanchez here, they decide that maybe it's my turn. So I go up there and I start to light this string of firecrackers, and Jimmy Gomez says, no, go on down further. Go on down further. Dumb old me, so I start walking down the hallway. I tell people, never listen to your friends. So I start walking down the hallway, and I strike this match, and I'm just ready to light it. And this big black dude comes out of the darkness and literally picked me up by the doggone back of my shirt, pulled out a knife and popped it right underneath my chin. I wet my pants. I started crying. I'll tell you, it was so doggone funny. This guy just practically dropped me because he was laughing so hard, because I'm just pleading with him like mad. I take off running for the doggone door, and Jimmy and Buddy hold it shut on me. And I'm trying to get out, and this big black dude's coming after me, and he's laughing like mad. And I turn around, and I was very small, so I hit down on the floor and scooted between his legs, and I went down to the other door, and I hit that door so hard it knocked the screen door off. And I come out there, and I practically flew off the stairs, and I ran down 2 blocks of the old Southern Mansion. Now, they had a cook down there, big, heavy black guy that we used to call Smokey. And whenever we were hungry, we'd go in there, and he always got us something to eat. I hit the back door of the Southern Mansion, come sliding underneath the butcher table, and Smokey says, what's wrong, boy? And I said, some guy's going to kill me. Some guy's going to kill me. And old Smokey picked up his cleaver and walked outside and looked around and come back in and says, nobody's going to harm you. You just sit down. Do you want something to eat? I think it took me half an hour to stop shaking. And of course, this is probably embellished a lot in my mind, but I'll tell you what, thinking back on it was funny, but back then it wasn't.
About how old were you then?
I think I was about 4th or 5th grade. So World War II was still going on. And but I'll never forget old Smokey. He was right out of the movies, you know, big black face, big black hands, and big white uniform, and a big white cap, and he's going out there with that cleaver. And like I said, this probably had been embellished, because the more I tell the story, the more I think it's funny. And I'm trying to remember other things.
Do you remember anything about the Grays?
Yeah.
They ran the Cozy Club?
Yes, okay. Yeah, okay, I'm saying, yeah, I'm trying to say, yeah, the Cozy Club. Yeah, the Cozy Club was a place that we couldn't get into. It was one of the few places in town that, as kids, we could not get into, because they really had a closed clientele. The clientele was really the upper crust of Casper. You knew that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't a slop joint. It was the upper crust of Casper. And so they wanted us out of there because they didn't want us to be able to recognize anyone and start spreading tales about who was down there.
We've
And it
had
was,
mixed reports from the black citizens that we've interviewed. Some say they did not allow African Americans in there. Some say yes, but it was the right time and
it was the right person.
the right person.
The right person. I don't think they kept certain people out, but they didn't allow you in if they didn't know you. And they didn't let us in because of the fact that it was a so-called nice club. I never thought of that. Maybe they didn't let us in because of our name. I never thought of that. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they probably kept us out because of the fact that it was a nicer club and they didn't want us hustling the customers. Because the cook was good to us. Yeah. But I remember seeing black people in there. Other than just the kitchen help. I think it depended on who you were. I think there was a caste system, truthfully. There was in the Mexican-American community. I'll never forget, my dad was at the Eagles one time, and the Eagles were upstairs about where Dillard's, well, the old Wonder Bar, down to the north of the Wonder Bar. They were upstairs. And I would go up there with my dad, and he was in the Eagles, and they had a lot of Mexican nationals come into town to work because it was wartime. And they were coming to the dances that the Eagles had. And somebody said at a meeting, I think we need to keep the Mexicans out, excuse me. And someone says, well, let's keep the blacks out too, because they'd have blacks coming to the dances. They'd bring their own girls because you wouldn't have anybody interracially dancing. And my dad, I remember he said he stood up and he says, well, he says, if you're going to keep these people out, he says, I'll fight you because you're letting me in here. He said, yeah, but Percy, you're different. And my dad says, no, I'm not different. He says, my skin's darker than most of those people. He was a very small, short, dark, Indian-looking man. And he said, if you're going to keep those people out, he says, I will not be. And he was very important to it because he played many times for the dances. And he had his own little country band, and they would go all over central Wyoming playing. And he was making extra money that way. My mother, when in the 30s, they would play around Wyoming. My mother would play the piano, and my brother would play a guitar, my father would play guitar. My sister would play a violin, and my brother and sister would both sing. And then Mr. Peak, who lived over on Ash Street, would play a violin. My mother played the mandolin, my sister played the piano, that was it. But they had a little band, and for the couple of years that I was born, while my mother is still alive, they would take me with them, and I would sleep behind the piano. And they would play all the way out to Alcova, which was a long ways out. Those two trees, about halfway out to Alcova, there used to be a little dance hall there on the old highway. And as you heading out to Alcova, you see these two big, huge trees down there. There used to be a little dance hall there. And then they would play up toward Casey and Midwest. And they'd play a lot of times in Glen Rock. But he played for the Eagles, and he didn't charge the Eagles except for the other people. So he flat said, if you're going to keep these people out, he says, I'll fight you. He said, I'll drop out of the Eagles. We had in the 43, I think it was, because I was in St. Anthony's, probably about second or third grade, there was a rise in the Ku Klux Klan, and it was all in Rollins. And so they started coming into Casper, and my dad and a bunch of the Knights of Columbus went down and complained, and they had a bunch of the people from the AME church, and basically community leaders going down and saying, we don't want these people in here. And so they gave notice to the business community, anybody who belonged to the Ku Klux Klan or supported it, they would not be partaking in their business. And at that time there were a lot more Mexican types percentage-wise in Casper than there are now, because you got to remember we had a war going on, and there were a lot of people coming up here to work. So I remember my dad telling stories about the fact that they kept the Ku Klux Klan down in Rollins. But they didn't last very long. They died out pretty quick. They tried to come in the 40s, early 40s, and after the priests at the Catholic Church and a bunch of other people said, you allow those people in here, we'll boycott your businesses. And so they pretty much stayed out. It's kind of like the Equality Day thing. It really was.
That's great. Can I ask you a question about when you were selling newspapers down there? You said there were blacks also selling newspapers at the same time. Do you remember any names or anything?
There were only a couple. There weren't many black families.
Okay.
Can't remember any names. That's everybody who's selling newspapers were pretty equal. And I think it was kind of a Mexican monopoly, if I remember right. I don't know if that's fair to say that, because there are a lot of other guys that were not Hispanic who were selling newspapers, but I think we dominated. But it was kind of fun.
Through the 40s and then into the 50s, et cetera, Leo, can you think of any instances of out-and-out discrimination against blacks or Mexican Americans by establishments or organizations or anything? Or
Yeah, okay, I'll tell you a good one.
Okay.
Good one. This is just before I went in the Marine Corps. My uncle was from the Greek Isles. His name was James Demas. He had the old Demas Cafe, the cafe on First Street, and then where the cafe is there across the street from the Raldo's Theater on the alley. He had his restaurant there, and then he moved out and opened up the Western Grill in the early 50s. My uncle had been beaten up by a highway patrolman because he was a dirty Greek. And I think that happened in 1951. In 1952, I'm out at my uncle's restaurant. My cousin, James, had just come back from Korea because he was a retread from World War II, sent over there to fly a tail gunner on B-17s, B-29s when they were dropping bombs on Korea. And I was in there on a Sunday morning somehow or another getting a breakfast off of them because I worked there every so often as a dishwasher and made some extra money. And I was in there sitting there having breakfast or something like that, sitting at the counter. And a car drove up, and a black man in an Air Force uniform and decorations from Korea gets out with his wife and two children. I think it was a boy and a girl, and they were a beautiful family. And they started to come into the restaurant, and my cousin met him at the door, and he says, "I'm sorry, we can't serve you people." And the guy turned around, got in his car, and drove off in a huff. And my cousin came in, I said, "Why can't you serve those people?" And he says, "Well," he says, "we just don't serve blacks, unless they're with a football team or something like that." And I said, "He's in the Air Force. He was in Korea. You were in the Air Force." He said, "If I feed those people, you won't, but everybody here will get up and walk out." And I said, "How do you know that?" It was just an accepted fact that you didn't serve them. The dirtiest book, the most obscene book in the world, and I saw it one time, because I can't remember who the family was that showed it to me. There was a fellow named Leo R. Sanchez, and he was black. Believe it or not, Leo R. Sanchez, when I was in 8th grade, and he was black. And
Here in Casper?
Here in Casper. He was only here for a short time, but I thought it was so unusual to have somebody with the same name that I decided to find out who he was, and I was hanging around with him. And I went over to somebody's house, and I can't remember who he was staying with. I think he was just a relative. And they showed me a book, and it was a list of restaurants in various states that blacks could eat in. Now, my uncle, when a black man came for tried to eat in his restaurant, I don't remember this at the Western Grill, but when he was on Center Street, he had a place in the back in his kitchen that he would feed black people. And if a family was traveling through and came in and asked if they could have a meal, my uncle had said, "Well, I got a place, drive around toward the alley here and park in that space, and then come in the back door." And then he'd take their order and, at that point, treat them like anybody else. But there was a great fear among restaurant owners that if you let people in, that other people would leave. And I don't know that. I remember one time, in fifth grade. I know it's fifth grade. It had to be third or fifth grade because I had Sister Mary Thomasita, who was the most fantastic woman I've ever met. And Sister Mary Thomasita was teaching social justice. In third grade, she interested me in my favorite saint. And my favorite saint is a fellow by the name of Martin de Porres. Blessed Martin, well, Saint Martin de Porres. In third grade, he was Blessed Martin, thinking that he's going to be a saint someday. He was a black man from Peru. And if you come to my house, you'll see his picture and you'll see his statue. You go to St. Patrick's Church, go out the north door from the church, and you will see a shrine to St. Martin de Porres. St. Martin is the patron saint of social justice. His feast day is November 3rd. I never miss a Mass on November 3rd. And I have a little relic of St. Martin's, and I always take it to Mass, and Father puts it on the altar, and he always says the Mass of St. Martin. Now, he became a saint in the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church, before you're a saint, you're blessed, meaning they're looking into it, see if you deserve this. He became a saint somewhere in the 80s, and Pope John Paul II named him the patron of social justice. Well, he's also the patron of barbers, and he's also the patron of, I keep wanting to say veterinarians, because you'll always see him with a dog, a mouse. Oh my God, I can't even remember. But he always has 3 animals with him. There's a mouse, a cat, and a dog. Okay. And so if you're up at St. Patrick's Church, just go out the north side of the door and you'll see a picture of St. Martin there. I mean a statue of St. Martin, a shrine. I've built about 3 or 4 shrines, and the first one I built was St. Martin.
I didn't know you did that.
Oh yeah. And St. Martin, I have a great affection for her, because Sister Mary Thomasita used to teach us about injustice, social injustice. I had her for 5th grade also, and we were sitting there talking about Jews and things like this, and I said, Sister, I said, how come that a black man cannot go to school in the South with white people? How come they have to eat in different restaurants? How come they have to drink out of different water fountains? I could remember Sister Mary Thomasita turning, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, if anything, this will change, and it will change in your lifetime. And I'll never forget, these kids don't know anything about civil rights.
They are learning.
I will never forget when that Civil Rights Act passed. I finally got a hold of her. I got a hold of Sister Mary Thomasita. She was supposed to be in Kansas City. She was out in California. And I got a hold of her. And I can't remember where I got her phone number from. I don't know if she's still alive or not. And so she said, yes. And I said, this is Leo Sanchez. I just wanted, you remember me? And she said, oh, how could I ever forget you? Because I was a real handful. And I said, you remember when you told us that it would change in our lifetime? It changed. And she says, oh, I told you that? Of course, she couldn't remember, but that really made an impression on me. She came back to Cass for a few years later, somewhere around the 70s. And she brought a picture of me and herself walking down the street going toward church. Somebody had taken a picture with one of the little brownie cameras. It's only this big. Remember those little brownie cameras? Mm-hmm. And she gave that to me. It's hanging up in a place of honor in my house. But she was kind of a very special person. She came from Kansas City, and Kansas City was segregated. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't understand it either.
Leo, as you left St. Anthony's, you went into the public schools here.
Ninth grade at NCHS.
What are your memories of race relations at that time throughout the public schools?
Basically, every black kid was in sports. That's the only thing I could think of. I don't remember any. I remember a kid one time, we used to go across the Chili King, or across the kitchen, right across the street from the cafeteria door. There was a family that had a garage, and they had a restaurant in there. And they served hamburgers. I went in there and bought a hamburger one time, and this guy said, get out of my way, you little spick. And I went over and I asked Jimmy Gomez, I said, what's a spick? I didn't know what a spick was. Mm-hmm. You know, I said, what's a spick? And so,
Do you guys know what spick is?
so Jimmy says, well, that's you. I said, you mean I'm a spick? Because I'd never been called anything like that before in my life. And I thought that was kind of hilarious. And so I started making fun of it. We'd go around calling each other spicks and stuff like that, you know. But it was kind of, it was ninth grade. Some guy told me, get out of the way, you little spick. And of course, you got to remember, when I was in high school, I was 4'11" when I went into high school. Weighed 75 pounds. When I graduated from high school, I was 5'4" and weighed 105 pounds. So I go down and join the Marine Corps. And I ended up a little taller. I think it's because we had different kind of food. We never had meat. We were very poor. My dad would make $200. 125 went to pay for his bills. And then we got to live on literally $75 a month. Well, he had his house paid for, but we didn't even have a car because everything went to pay for bills. He finally got out of debt in 1956. And it helped me. It helped me because I went into the old Wyoming National Bank, and which is, I don't even know what one it is. It's one that looks like an orange, upside down orange or whatever it is. I went in the old Wyoming National Bank to buy a house. This was in July 27th, because it was our first anniversary. And I went in to buy a house. And the guy looked at me and he says, how much would you make a year? And I said, well, sir, I'm just starting to teach, and I'll be making $4,000 a year. He says, how much does your wife make? And I said, well, she's going to be making about $4,500 a year. And they said they couldn't count the wife's family, the wife's income, because a woman gets pregnant, she stays home and raises the family. So you don't count, at that time, you don't count the woman's income. So they're just going on my income. And he says, well, the house you want to buy costs $17,500, and you just can't afford the payment. And I'm really defeated. I'm sitting there wanting to buy a house. The payments were a horrendous $96 a month, and I was going to have to go out and pay $150 to rent one. The math didn't figure out for me, and I was really upset. I'm sitting there just really depressed, and my wife and I, the guy just told us this, and the vice president of the bank came by. I can't remember who he was. And he says, how are you doing, Leo? And I said, fine, sir. He said, what are you trying to do? And I said, well, he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I just got a job teaching here, but I'm trying to buy a house, but I don't qualify. He said, you don't qualify. And he picked up the papers, and he looked them over, and he looked at this loan officer, and he says, you give this boy a loan. This is Percy's son. And put his initials on there, and I got the loan because of my dad.
What were your parents' names? We didn't ask that.
Percy and Ella. But I'll tell you, when I was in grade school, I got to tell you this. When I was in grade school, Senator Barrett, Governor Barrett, would come down the street, and I'd be selling newspapers, and I'd say, newspaper, Governor? And he said, nope. He says, I get them for free. He says, what's your name? And I said, Leo Sanchez, sir. And he'd say, are you Percy's boy? Now, I'll tell you what, I had a tremendous amount of pride that the governor of Wyoming knew my dad. And he wasn't the only governor. I mean, if I mentioned Barrett and O'Monaghy and Hickey, Governor Simpson, you know, I was in college and I'm selling shoes at Wolfer's Shoes, and Governor Simpson come in running for election or something, and he goes, what's your name? And I said, Leo Sanchez, sir. And he says, oh, you're Percy's boy. And that was always my proudest title, Percy's boy. To this day, when I go places like last year at the Christmas party at the hospital, I'm going around and I'm talking to people and so on. This one old lady says, was Percy your father? And I said, yes, ma'am. Says, he was a good man, you know, and stuff like this. Or people will say, you're Percy's boy. Yeah, the thing they always remember about my father, he was goosey. And when they got him in the showers at the Standard Oil, they'd take turns goosing him. I mean, you'd goose him, and he would jump clear across the room. And they'd make fun of it. Well, it was, if you knew my dad, it was so funny. He was just this very quiet, short fellow, and you just reach over and just goose him once, and he'd hit the ceiling. And it was so much fun for people to goose him because of the fact he was so goosey. I know You don't do things like that today, but it was funny.
Leo, we have a home visit we're going to have to make in about 15 or 20
Okay.
minutes, so what I want to do right now is tap on your expertise and understanding of history and what you know. I remember when you met with us first, you talked about someplace called Nigger Hill. Where is that?
Oh,
What do you
yeah.
know about that?
Well, everybody went hunting over, or went fishing over Nigger Hill, and what it was is you just go down to the end of the mountain and head out, heading toward Deer Creek. Couldn't tell you where it is right now, but they called it Nigger Hill because there was an old Negro living out there. It was never derogatory. Never derogatory. In fact, the old man was so proud that he had a place called after him because nobody could remember his name, so they just say Nigger Hill.
Okay, you don't know his name then?
No, I don't.
Okay. It's also been told to us that the very first person owned a bathtub in Casper was a black
Black man.
Do you know who that was?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you something else.
Okay.
I'll bet you no one's told you this. Caramel corn was invented in Casper.
No.
Oh, yes. First man to do it was reputed to be a black cook.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's where the old Byrite, right near the old Byrite, ask people about that.
Okay.
Where the old Byrite drugstore, which is a toy store right behind the Raldo now, right next door to there was a caramel corn shop or something. Now, maybe I have my streets wrong. I'm trying to remember. But I remember people telling me caramel corn was invented in Casper, and the owner had some black guy working back there, and came up with caramel corn, and everybody said, well, that guy's too dumb to come up with it. Got to be the cook.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I swear to God, you ask people and they'll tell you caramel corn was invented here, just like cheeseburgers were invented in Denver. Mm-hmm. And so, you knew that.
No.
Well, the old Piggly Wiggly on Colfax, near St. Anthony's Hospital. It's closed down now. It's no longer a restaurant and motel. But that's where cheeseburgers were invented.
Denver, Colorado, what do you know? Any other either memories or anecdotes or stories that you know of that you could share with us about the African American history here?
I can't remember if this kid was there. I told you we had a black kid going to St. Anthony's School. Trying to remember 1943. I don't know if he was there that year, but I do know there was another kid and myself that came from very poor families, and my dad would work for the Catholic Church in order to get tuition paid for. And what happened, it has to be third grade. It has to be third grade. So it's 1943. If you bought a certain amount of savings stamps, you got to ride in a Jeep from the air base. They brought Jeeps in, and kids got to ride in a Jeep. And this one kid, myself, and I don't know if it's a black kid or not, Bennett. Bennett was his name. Bobby Bennett. Bobby Bennett. Anyway, I can't remember if it was him or not, but anyway, there were two of us that couldn't afford to buy savings stamps. So we're standing there, unable to get a ride in the Jeep because all the kids are going, because you had the kids that stand there who bought the savings stamps and they had their little books. Savings stamps, you paid 10 cents every Wednesday. And you got a little pink stamp, and if you paid a quarter, you got a blue stamp. I think that's what it was. And you put them in a book, and then when you got enough, you got a savings bond, which helped finance the war. So anyway, I didn't, and this other kid in third grade couldn't afford to buy the savings stamps. And we're sitting there just really upset because we're not going to get a ride. And all of a sudden, Sister Mary Thomasita goes over and talks to this soldier. Soldier comes over and literally picks both of us up and throws in the back of a Jeep. And we went from the front of St. Anthony's School, left on Walcott, straight up to 11th Street. I can remember this day. 11th Street up to Jefferson, Jefferson down to 5th, the 5th down to Durban, Durban to 7th Street, and 7th Street back to St. Anthony's School. I was so excited. I got to ride in the Jeep. And I really cannot tell you if the other kid was this Bennett boy or not. But I do remember there were two of us that couldn't afford it. Sister Mary Talmasita spoke to the soldier, and he literally picked us up like this and just dumped us in the back of the Jeep. I will tell you, as a Mexican heritage, Casper, Wyoming is the best place that you could ever live. And I've had a number of blacks who said the same thing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. But it was better than any other place in the whole cotton picking world. And I will tell you today that anybody, especially a black or Mexican American type, if they want to make it today, if they can't make it in Casper, Wyoming, they can't make it anywhere. Because I know for a fact that every teacher and every person that I know in my understanding, or the people that I know in the community, and I think I know quite a few, they're looking for people to succeed. And I get angry when I have a black kid or a Hispanic kid that is not given it anything in school. And I get so angry at them. And when they start pulling this, well, you know, I don't have a chance business, if you can't make it in Casper, boy, you can't make it anywhere. I love Casper. I mean, if there's ever a love affair for a city, I haven't.
We've heard that from many, many people about Casper being a great place to live. A whole lot of people agree with that. When did you start teaching for the district? What year?
64.
Were you aware of at any time discrimination against hiring policies in the district during the 60s?
No, in the 60s, in fact, I know doggone well that they were looking for people. I got hired right off the bat. I got to tell you this, just a second. I'm the first affirmative action case in the entire history of the world. When I came from St. Anthony School, we had a classic 19th century education. I mean, Brave New World is going to be on Sunday. It's no good. It's a movie. Read the book. I read the book in 5th grade. I read Beowulf in 3rd grade because those nuns really pushed literature and reading and read the classics. I go from 8th grade at St. Anthony School into 9th grade at NCHS. First thing the English teacher says is, we're going to diagram a sentence. And I said, pardon me? She says, we're going to diagram a sentence. I said, I haven't diagrammed a sentence since 4th grade. Why are we diagramming a sentence? Well, we're going to diagram a sentence so you can learn how to write a perfect sentence. I said, I'll write you a perfect sentence now. I'll write a perfect paragraph. But I am not going to diagram a sentence. Well, that was I got kicked out of so many classes because I would argue with the teachers. I know you find that hard to believe. But I had a very tough time, and I barely made it through high school. Kelly Walsh, I only had 15 and a half credits. I worked 5 to 6 hours a day when I was going to high school. I worked 8 hours a day going to college. Kelly Walsh was looking at my record, and he knew doggone well that I was half a credit short. He needed 16 credits. He gave me a half a credit for working, and I got my diploma. I go into the Marine Corps, I come back, I go to Casper College, I go to Colorado University, I come back and I ask for a job, walked into Kelly Walsh's office and asked for a job because he was assistant superintendent hiring. He says, you come with me, and he takes me up to Dean Morgan, walks into Quincy Tartar's office and says, you hire this boy now. And I mean, I walked in, I got a job like that on Kelly Walsh's deathbed. I walked up to the hospital to see him and I said, you old Bart. You hired me just because you wanted to have someone that you could point a finger at and say, now, if he made it, anybody can make it. And so I keep telling everybody I was the first affirmative action case in Casper, and Kelly got tears in his eyes.
Mm-hmm. Leo, is there anybody, I've kind of taken over here, I'm sorry, but is there anybody else you think we ought to interview? That's how we're getting names, references from the people that we're interviewing that you think would have a knowledge that we need to hear.
Policeman. Oh my God, he used to drive the VA van, Slim Hollenbeck. The police used to be very, very prejudiced against anybody who was a minority. Mm-hmm. In fact, I have witnessed policemen, the old Grand Central Hotel and Bar, taking minorities and seeing how far they could throw them down the stairs.
Is he still around?
Slim Hollenbeck is still around. He can give you some information like you can't believe. Okay. He's a great man. He harassed the hell out of me when I was a kid. And then he laughs. See, if I hadn't harassed you, you wouldn't have turned out so good. And he is a good man. Didn't think so when I was a kid, because we were snuts. But Slim is a good man.
Anybody else?
I keep wanting to say Babe Miller, but he's dead. He was a police chief. Anybody who's an old cop. Joe Gallegos.
Your friend?
No, not Joe. No, my uncle. Bob Gallegos.
Okay.
And stress the fact that you want to talk about early day Casper.
Okay.
And he can tell you about those fights, and he can tell you about, I mean, he lived all his life until the 50s in North Casper. But he lives up on Swanton right now, Bob Gallagher's.
Okay.
I don't know if she's capable of it. I have an aunt by the name of Christine Peters who lives up on Fenway. I'm trying to think of my relatives. She might be pretty ill right now. Call them back, both, and tell them you want to talk to them about early day Casper.
Okay, gotcha. What is
Don't
your...
mention World War II to Bob because he won't talk to you.
Okay.
He was on a ship that was hit by kamikazes, and
Ooh.
they literally went in there and had to scrape the burnt flesh of human beings off the bulkhead.
Right, that's hard. What is your month and day of birth?
9/21/35.
9/21/35. Okay, you guys want to look and see if there's anything else?
I rattled on, didn't know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I just kind of
The
reminisced.
questions? Did we cover everything on the questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you seen that statue of St. Martin?
No, I'm gonna have to go by and see it.
It's just on the north side. I got to paint it. I got to paint. My wife says your shrine is falling apart.
At St. Anthony's?
St. Pat's.
St. Pat's. Oh, well, that's it. Okay.
It's on
Anything
the-
else that you...
It's in
want-
between the school and the church.
Okay. I'll go by and see it. It's been most informative, Leo. Thank you very much. If you, by the way, if you come across anything...
Anybody I can think of?
Yeah.
Let me